The moment I took that first breath of steam rising from the mug, something in my gut whispered, "Not today." The coffee smelled wrong, too sharp, sweet at first, but then something underneath it, like copper and almonds, like something trying too hard to pretend it was safe. Sean had just smiled at me, like he always did lately, a practiced grin that didn't touch his eyes. "Try it," he said. "It's Colombian, your favorite." But his voice was tight, like he was holding his breath. The sun was barely up, casting that yellowed glow over our kitchen tiles, the kind that made everything feel nostalgic or haunted, depending on your mood. Peter, my father-in-law, sat at the far end of the table, silent as always, his oxygen machine wheezing in time with the clock. He didn't look at me. He never did. Not since Sean and I moved into the house after Peter's diagnosis. What was supposed to be a short-term visit had turned into 18 months of whispered conversations, locked drawers, and Sean accidentally forgetting my antidepressants at the pharmacy. "You always forget everything these days," Peter had said once, dry as dust, when I couldn't find my work ID. That day, I'd swallowed the insult, but today, something in my chest thudded differently. I studied Sean's face over the rim of the mug. He wasn't blinking. His hands, usually loose and casual, were curled on the counter, knuckles pale. "I need a second," I murmured, placing the mug down without sipping. "Didn't sleep well." My chair scraped the floor too loudly as I stood, and I felt their eyes follow me down the hall like searchlights. I didn't go to the bathroom. I went to the guest room, opened the window for air, and stared out at the frost-covered yard, breathing. Something was wrong. Not just with the coffee, with everything. Before we go on, tell me in the comments where you're watching this from. We love hearing from you. And if it's your first time on this channel, welcome. Please consider subscribing. It helps us keep telling stories that matter. Now back to what happened that morning. Because what I didn't know yet was that cup of coffee would change everything. Not just for me, but for Sean. And for a secret he'd been keeping for far too long. I didn't go back to the kitchen that morning. I didn't even pretend. Instead, I grabbed my keys, told Sean I was heading to the co-op for almond milk, and drove straight to the walk-in clinic across town. The one I used to volunteer at before everything in my life got swallowed up by Peter's declining health and Sean's increasing control. The nurse at the front desk blinked when she saw me, probably surprised by the dark circles under my eyes or the way I clutched my stomach like it might fall out. I asked for a toxicology screen, told them I didn't feel safe, didn't feel right. "I've been dizzy, nauseous, foggy, and tired for months," I whispered. "And I swear, my coffee smelled like almonds." I don't know what I expected them to say. I guess I just needed someone to believe me before I started to think I'd imagined it all. While they ran tests, I sat in the small beige waiting room and stared at a poster about chemical poisoning. I hadn't slept more than 3 hours a night in weeks. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd wake up in a panic, cold sweat sticking to my neck, convinced someone was watching me. Not someone. Sean. The man who used to bring me flowers on Fridays just because, who used to dance with me in the kitchen after dinner. Now he just handed me coffee and stared too long, like he was waiting for something to happen, like I was an hourglass about to run out. 2 hours later, the physician's assistant returned. "We found something," she said. "Not enough to hospitalize you, but we need to talk. She sat across from me with a clipboard. Trace amounts of sodium nitrite. It's used in preserving meat, but in larger doses, it can be harmful. Repeated small exposures can cause what you're describing: fatigue, headaches, nausea. And more concerning, it's been linked to long-term cardiovascular stress. She paused. Do you live with anyone who handles chemicals? Anyone who cooks for you regularly? I felt like the floor dropped from under me. My husband, I whispered. Sean cooks breakfast every day. I drove home in silence. Not a word. Just the sound of tires on pavement and the ticking of the turn signal I never used. The house was quiet when I walked in. Sean had gone to work. Peter's door was closed, oxygen machine humming. I went to the kitchen, looked at the coffee pot, the sink, the mugs. I opened the trash bin. Nothing. Clean. Like every trace of that morning had been scrubbed away. I didn't know whether to scream or cry or laugh. I ended up doing none. I just stood there, motionless, wondering how long it had been going on. That night, I couldn't eat. Sean brought me soup, chicken and wild rice, my favorite. I stared at it for 15 minutes before quietly dumping it down the bathroom sink and running hot water over the bowl. I wasn't taking chances anymore. My body was already whispering warnings, and I was done ignoring them. 3 days passed. I kept up the act, smiled when Sean came home, asked Peter how he was feeling, pretended to fall asleep early, then stayed up reading articles on slow poisoning, symptoms, legal precedents, chemical access. I learned more than I ever wanted to know. Cyanide, arsenic, sodium, nitrite, all detectable in small doses, all available to the public if you know where to look. Then, on the 4th day, I found it. Sean had left his laptop open in the living room while he was outside chopping firewood. I told myself I was just checking emails. That was a lie. I searched his browser history and bank statements, and there it was, a receipt, 1 month ago, an online purchase from a niche chemical supplier. The product name wasn't listed directly, but I clicked the link and found the product page. Preservative-grade sodium nitrite, 99% purity, not for human consumption. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. My hands were shaking. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was real. And it wasn't over. That night, I stood in the laundry room, staring at the stack of Peter's towels. I thought about how this man, confined to a chair with his oxygen tank and bitter tongue, had always made me feel like I was trespassing in my own marriage. He'd once told me, "You're not a Calloway. You're a stray Sean picked up out of sympathy." I'd laughed it off. That was a year ago. But now, I thought about the way Peter looked at me the morning I'd walked away from that coffee. Like he knew something I didn't. Like he'd been waiting for me to fall. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the silence. The way they made me feel crazy without ever saying a word. Death by doubt, by slow erosion of the self. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Would you have confronted him already? Or kept pretending like I did? And if you're just joining us, don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Real, raw, and sometimes hard to believe. Now let me tell you what I did next. Because while Sean thought he was playing chess, he never realized I'd already started flipping the board. From that moment on, I stopped being scared. I started taking notes. I bought a cheap spiral notebook from the grocery store. the kind with flimsy paper and a plastic cover that bends too easily. I tucked it behind the insulation in the laundry room wall, a hollow spot I'd found by accident the week we moved in. Each morning, I wrote down everything: what time Sean brewed the coffee, what it smelled like, how I felt after taking a sip, if I dared. Most days I didn't. I'd fake a stomach ache, a phone call, or just conveniently forget to drink it. When Sean started asking why I was skipping breakfast, I told him I was trying intermittent fasting. Supposed to help with brain fog, I said, watching his eyes flicker just enough to know he clocked the excuse. That makes sense, he replied. You've seemed off lately. I smiled. I'm working on it. What he didn't know was that I'd also placed a hidden camera, one of those discreet baby monitors, in the kitchen behind the spice rack. Motion triggered, audio enabled. I set it to notify my old email address, the one I hadn't told Sean I still had. Every time he brewed coffee, ground beans, opened the pantry, I had footage. I was done guessing. I needed proof. Around the same time, I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in almost 4 years. Jenna Calloway, Sean's younger sister. We'd never been close. Peter had practically disowned her after she dropped out of nursing school and moved to Portland, claiming she was ungrateful and soft. Sean rarely spoke of her, only to mention how she'd let the family down when their mother died. But I remembered her kindness at our wedding, how she'd slipped me a handwritten note under my bouquet. If you ever need someone to listen, I'm not far. At the time, I hadn't understood why she wrote it. Now I did. I sent her a single message. I think something's wrong. With Sean. With me. I need help. She replied within an hour. Where do you want to meet? We met in a neutral place, an old bookstore cafe downtown, mostly empty except for grad students and a barista who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Jenna had changed, shorter hair, sharper posture, but her eyes were the same, direct, no nonsense, and filled with fire. I showed her the photos of the receipt, described the symptoms, told her what the doctor had said. I didn't even have to finish. She sat back, jaw clenched. I knew it, she whispered. I always knew he had it in him. Dad, too. You weren't the first one they tried to break down, Emily. Just the first one who didn't disappear quietly. I blinked. What do you mean? Jenna hesitated, then leaned in. When Mom got sick, it wasn't just the cancer that made things bad. Dad started hiding her meds, telling the doctor she was overreacting, imagining things. He'd tell her she was becoming paranoid. Sean backed him up, said she needed to rest more and stop making scenes. She was half the woman she used to be by the end, not because of the illness, but because they convinced her she was losing her mind. Her voice cracked. She died in hospice without ever realizing what they'd done. That was the moment everything locked into place for me. The missing pills. The carefully cultivated narrative of my forgetfulness. The way Peter always looked pleased when I seemed unwell. They were never just annoyed by me. They were working together to erase me, slowly, quietly. Over the next few weeks, Jenna became my secret weapon. She knew how to access medical records, how to read between the lines on lab results. She taught me how to secure a second toxicology screen from an independent clinic using a pseudonym. We coordinated calendars, collected samples of leftover coffee, and supplement bottles. I logged each incident, and she backed it up on an encrypted drive. If anything happens to you, she said, I go straight to the police. Meanwhile, I kept up the act at home, smiled when Sean kissed my cheek, listened to Peter's lectures about duty and upholding the family name. I started complimenting Sean's cooking again, telling him how grateful I was that he took such good care of me. He beamed, like a little boy praised by a teacher. "Of course," he said. "You're my everything." Lies, every word. One night, as we were lying in bed, he reached over and ran his fingers down my spine. "You know," he whispered, "I'm really proud of how much calmer you've been lately. You've been easier to live with. It's nice." I forced myself to hum in agreement, my back to him, eyes wide open in the dark. Calm, easier. That's what he wanted. A version of me so hollowed out I wouldn't fight back. But I wasn't getting weaker. I was sharpening. Before we move on, let me ask you something. Have you ever pretended not to know something just to protect yourself? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. These stories are real, and sometimes they're uncomfortable, but they're worth hearing. Especially when silence almost cost someone everything. Because my silence was almost permanent. But now I was listening, watching, waiting. And soon, it would be Sean's turn to feel like the ground beneath him wasn't stable anymore. The first major crack in our plan came with Peter's death. It happened on a Tuesday. Cloudy skies, bone-cold wind outside, and a strange calm in the house that morning. Almost too quiet. I'd made a habit of avoiding the kitchen when Sean brewed coffee, but that day, he didn't offer me any. Instead, he stood near the sink, staring out the window with his jaw locked tight and a muscle twitching under his eye. "He's gone," he said flatly when I came downstairs. "Dad passed sometime early this morning." I froze. "What?" "But he was stable last night." "He was old," Sean said, shrugging like it was no big thing. "The nurse said his heart just stopped. Natural causes." But I saw the shift behind his eyes, the slight tremor in his hand as he wiped down the already clean counter. The fact that he'd already made the cremation call before I even got downstairs. Peter's oxygen machine had been unplugged. I noticed it right away. Sean said he'd found it that way. "Must have tripped during the night," he muttered. "You know how finicky that outlet is." But the outlet wasn't faulty, and the plug wasn't loose. It was coiled and placed neatly behind the machine. Deliberate, tidy, surgical. Just like everything else Sean touched when he wanted a problem to disappear. That night, Jenna drove straight in from Portland, using Peter's death as the perfect excuse to be back in the house. Sean looked uncomfortable the entire time she was there, like a dog watching someone circle its buried bone. "You're not staying, are you?" he asked her while avoiding her gaze. "Just the night," Jenna replied sweetly, "to pay my respects." But I saw how he gritted his teeth, and I saw how he watched her and me whispering in the den, suspicious and silent. The very next day, the camera I'd hidden in the kitchen disappeared. I came home from errands, opened my email expecting the usual motion alert, and found nothing. I checked the spice rack. The camera was gone, not moved, not knocked down. Gone. That same night, Jenna's car alarm went off in the middle of the night. When we checked the dash cam footage, it had been wiped. She swore she hadn't touched it, but someone had. "He's on to us," she whispered. "He's getting sloppy. That's when they're most dangerous." The pressure started to mount fast. Sean's behavior changed. he became more affectionate, at least in public, holding my hand too long at Peter's memorial, posting old photos of us online with captions like, "I couldn't do this life without her." He even suggested we take a trip, somewhere warm, to clear our heads after everything. It sounded romantic, but it felt like an exit plan, like he wanted me somewhere isolated, somewhere where no one would notice if I didn't come back. At home, it was different. Subtle things. My pills went missing again. My calendar was rearranged without explanation. Jenna caught him checking her bag when she left it in the hallway. "He's not just paranoid," she told me. "He's planning something." But the worst part? I started to doubt myself again. There were days I couldn't remember what I'd said or done the day before. Nights when my body felt heavy, my thoughts slurred. I woke up on the bathroom floor once with a cut on my lip and no memory of how I fell. Sean said I must have been sleepwalking. I wanted to scream, but I nodded instead, smiled, said I'd talk to a doctor. The next morning, I found a typed list taped to the fridge. Things to do to help Emily stay healthy. It included suggestions like track moods, double-check if meds were taken, monitor caffeine intake, and record sleep schedule. At the bottom, in Sean's handwriting, it said, "Might be early cognitive decline. Look into dementia screening." That was the moment I almost broke. He wasn't just trying to poison me. He was trying to erase me completely, to make me question my own mind so thoroughly that if anything happened, no one would believe it was him. Jenna sat across from me at a diner booth that night and said what I was too scared to admit out loud. "He's going to try again, Em. He's not finished. Your tests haven't been enough to get the police involved. You need something real, something undeniable." We both sat there, silent, as the waitress refilled our coffee. I stared at the mug in front of me, warm, safe, untouched by Sean's hands, and felt something in me shift. I was done collecting breadcrumbs. I was done playing defense. "I want to bait him," I said quietly. "I want him to make his move, and I want to be ready when he does." Before we go on, I want to ask you, have you ever felt like someone was rewriting your reality while smiling to your face? Have you ever had to stay quiet just to survive your own home? Let me know in the comments, and if you're new here, please hit subscribe. These stories matter because they remind us we're not alone. And sometimes, silence is the most dangerous weapon of all, because silence was exactly what Sean wanted from me. But he had no idea I was about to start speaking in a language he couldn't silence. Truth, receipts, evidence, and soon, justice. It happened on a Sunday. The air was sharp and cold, the kind of morning where everything felt too still, like even the wind was holding its breath. I woke up before Sean, crept downstairs, and stood in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the empty countertop. The house felt hollow, without Peter's wheezing machine echoing down the hall, but I didn't miss it. I didn't miss the way his eyes followed me, or the silence that always sat thick between us. Today, I wasn't afraid of this house. Not anymore. I moved carefully, pulled a brand new mug from the back of the cabinet, the same color and shape as the one I normally used, and set it next to the original. I labeled the bottom of each one with a nearly invisible mark, using a toothpick and food coloring. 1 dot, 2 dots. Jenna had helped me set up a second camera, this time hidden in a vent above the fridge after the last one disappeared. This time, The footage went straight to the cloud, encrypted. No more chances. At 8:07 a.m., Sean wandered in with a yawn that felt about as real as his love. "You're up early," he said, smiling. "Thought I'd surprise you. Made your favorite blend." He held up a steaming pot of dark roast, already pouring it into the mug I deliberately left just slightly more forward on the counter. I forced myself to smile. "You're sweet." My voice barely trembled. I took the mug with the one visible dot on the bottom, my real cup, and cradled it in my hands. I didn't drink, just walked slowly to the table, sat down, and watched him pour himself a cup. He was watching me too closely. His hand lingered on his own cup, but he didn't sip either. "You look tired," he said. "You didn't sleep well?" I shrugged. "You know how I am lately. Everything just feels off." That's when I set the trap. I reached across the table, touched his wrist gently, and smiled. "Actually, I think you're right. You've been so good to me through everything. I want you to relax today. Let me get your breakfast. You sit." He blinked. "You sure?" "Positive." I stood, walked to the stove, and as I passed his cup on the counter, I made the switch. Smooth. No hesitation. Just a simple rotation of the mugs, mine and his. The one he'd filled for me now sat in front of him. The one I'd poured from the pot for myself now sat in front of me. The markings underneath confirmed it. He now had the tainted cup. I had the safe one. I sat again. "Cheers," I said, lifting mine. He hesitated for just a second too long. Then he smiled, lifted his cup, and drank. It took 6 minutes. First, he started to sweat, just a little, under his hairline. Then came the twitch, his fingers drumming against the table with an irregular rhythm. He shifted in his seat, cleared his throat. Something tastes off," he said. His voice cracked slightly. I leaned forward, calm, composed. "Really? I think it tastes fine." I took a long, deliberate sip. By minute 9, Sean's hands were shaking. His face had gone pale, jaw clenched as his breathing grew shallow. "Emily," he whispered, eyes wide. I don't feel right." I tilted my head. "Is it your heart? Or your stomach? Or maybe just your imagination?" I stood slowly, watching him slump slightly in the chair. "I think we should call someone." He reached out, tried to grab my wrist. His hand missed. His entire body was trembling now, sweat soaking through his shirt. "Why?" he rasped. Why are you doing this to me?" I leaned close, voice low. "I didn't. You did. You made the coffee. You poisoned the mug. You just didn't realize I swapped them." His face contorted into panic. "You switched them." His mouth fell open. No. It wasn't supposed to be like this." I grabbed my phone and dialed. 911, I told the operator. "My husband is having what looks like a poisoning reaction. I believe it's intentional." Sean tried to stand, stumbled backward, and collapsed against the wall. He was panting, eyes rolling slightly. "I didn't mean to kill you," he gasped. "It was just enough to make you sick, like before. So you'd step back from everything. Jenna was getting too involved. You were getting too sharp." I looked down at him, my hand surprisingly steady. "And Peter? Was he too sharp too? Or just inconvenient?" His breath hitched. He said you were ruining everything, that the inheritance would disappear if you stayed. He was going to rewrite the trust, give part of it to you. Said, I couldn't run the estate without you, but you weren't listening. I knelt next to him, just close enough so he could hear me over the sirens starting to echo in the distance. You really thought I wouldn't fight back, that I'd fall apart, just like your mother did. He started sobbing, real ugly, panicked sobs. It was Dad's idea. I did what he said. The paramedics arrived minutes later. They worked fast, gave him something through an IV, asked me what I thought he'd ingested. I said I wasn't sure, but they might want to test for sodium nitrite. I watched them load his limp body into the ambulance, and I never once looked away. Jenna arrived 10 minutes after they left. She walked in and said nothing, just looked at the swapped mug still sitting on the table, then back at me. I nodded. It's done, I whispered. She exhaled. No, it's just beginning. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Could you have kept your composure while your abuser unraveled in front of you? Let's talk about it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. We tell stories that aren't just dramatic, they're real. And sometimes, justice starts with a single choice, like switching 2 mugs of coffee, like deciding your life matters too much to stay quiet. Because that morning, I didn't just catch him. I proved what he was. And I finally got my life back. By the time the hospital confirmed sodium nitrite poisoning, the footage had already gone to 3 places: Jenna's backup drive, my encrypted cloud folder, and a local detective's inbox. It was clear, crisp, unedited. The moment Sean lifted the cup, the trembling, the confession, and me, calm as ever, stating the facts into my phone. He made the coffee, he poured the mug, I switched them. He drank what he meant for me. Sean survived. Barely. He was in the ICU for 2 days, conscious but monitored around the clock. When the police interviewed him, he claimed confusion, stress. I thought I was drinking Emily's, he said weakly. But I wasn't trying to hurt her, just slow her down. We'd been fighting. She's not well. But the toxicology, the footage, and, most damning of all, his browser history and the recorded receipts said otherwise. The detective called it a clear pattern of premeditation. It didn't matter that I hadn't pressed charges yet. They had enough. He was arrested 2 weeks later after being released from the hospital, charged with attempted murder, reckless endangerment, and possession of a controlled substance with intent to harm. And that was just the beginning. What neither of us expected, what shocked even Jenna, was what came next. Peter's lawyer contacted me privately after Sean's arrest. I believe you should see this, he said, sliding a manila envelope across the desk. Inside was a draft, unsigned, but dated just 3 weeks before Peter's death. A revision of his trust. In it, Peter stated that should Sean's behavior prove disruptive to the estate's longevity, decision-making authority would shift to his daughter-in-law, Emily Grace Calloway. Me. I sat in that office with my hands shaking, reading the document over and over. Why didn't he sign it? I asked. The lawyer sighed. We were scheduled to meet. He died the morning of. I didn't say anything for a long time. Peter, for all his cruelty, had finally realized what his son was. And maybe, just maybe, he'd been trying to right a wrong. Too late for him, but not for me. With the draft and Jenna's testimony, we filed a motion to freeze Sean's access to the family trust. Jenna provided records of past manipulations, including doctored medical files from when their mother was sick, and the court agreed. Control of the estate was placed under temporary conservatorship, pending the outcome of the trial. And because of Peter's wording and the video evidence, I was named as a key stakeholder. I didn't want the money, not really. What I wanted was the story, the truth, to stand. For every version Sean had told about my fragile mental health to unravel publicly, for people to see what a quiet monster looked like. For once, I didn't want to protect anyone else's image but my own. The trial came 6 months later. I wore black. Jenna sat behind me every day. The courtroom was packed. Small-town scandal mixed with courtroom drama was irresistible. Sean pled not guilty, but his lawyer barely had a case. They tried to spin the poisoning as an accident, that he was suicidal, that I'd triggered him, that maybe I'd even tampered with the cup. But the jury didn't buy it. Over 5 days, I testified. I explained the months of sickness, the missing pills, the gaslighting, the voice recordings, the list on the fridge suggesting cognitive decline, the doctored sleep tracker logs. Jenna backed it all up with her own story of watching their father manipulate their dying mother, of Sean's history of control. And then the video played. The courtroom was so still you could hear the audio buzz from the overhead speakers. Sean's voice, thin and cracking. It wasn't supposed to be like this. And me, calmly responding, I switched them. That was it. That was the moment everything shattered. Sean was found guilty on all counts, sentenced to 15 years without parole, with a no-contact order placed between us. And just like that, the man who'd tried to write my ending was now behind bars, writing his own. After the trial, I stepped outside into a crisp autumn breeze and breathed for the first time in what felt like 2 years. Reporters asked questions. I didn't answer many, just one. How do you feel now that it's over? I looked straight into the camera. It's not over. It's just finally honest. Before we move on, I want to know, do you believe that justice always finds its way, even when it takes time? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. These stories aren't just dramatic. They're about reclaiming truth, one voice at a time. Because the thing Sean never understood was this. He thought I was weak because I stayed quiet. He thought I didn't know how to fight back. But silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's preparation. And now, it was my turn to speak. For good. A year later, I still have the mug. Not the one he tried to poison me with, but the one I switched. The one I poured for myself from the same pot. The one I drank from as I watched him unravel across the table. I had it glazed, framed, and mounted on the wall above my desk. People ask about it all the time when they visit the new office, my office, at the Ember House, the nonprofit Jenna and I opened 6 months ago for survivors of domestic psychological abuse. I tell them it's a reminder that survival doesn't always look like running. Sometimes it looks like staying still long enough for the truth to catch up. It's funny how people expect trauma to end cleanly. Like once the verdict comes down and the prison doors close, the healing begins right away. It doesn't. The nights are still long. Sometimes I wake up thinking I forgot to lock the door. I double-check my vitamins, smell my morning coffee every single time, and flinch when someone says my name too softly, like they're holding back something sharp behind their teeth. But I've also started laughing again. Not fake, polite chuckles. Real, loud, embarrassing laughter. I've started reading fiction again, books with messy, flawed heroines who don't need to be perfect to be powerful. I've gone back to watercolor painting, something I hadn't touched since before Peter moved in. And every Friday night, Jenna and I light a candle in the kitchen and drink wine while we prep care packages for our clients. Notes of encouragement, soft blankets, journals, and little cards that say things like, "You're not imagining it." Because that's the worst part of emotional abuse, the erasure. The quiet convincing that you're overreacting, dramatic, unstable. It took me months to stop apologizing for things I didn't do. Now, I catch myself mid-sentence, correct it, and move on. No more shrinking. And as for Sean, he writes letters. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork. I never open them. I keep them in a locked drawer in my home office. Not because I need them, but because I want to remember what manipulation looks like when it's desperate and caged. According to the last update from his parole officer, he's still claiming I misunderstood everything, still positioning himself as the real victim. That's the thing with men like Sean. They can't accept a world where they're not in control, where someone like me, quiet, patient, underestimated, wins. But I didn't win out of luck. I won because I trusted the part of me that whispered when everything else screamed I was wrong. I trusted my instincts. That's what I tell every woman who walks through the door at Ember House. If it feels off, you're probably right. We're taught to second-guess ourselves, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to smile through the unease and explain away the warning signs. But what I've learned, the hard way, is that intuition is a survival tool. It's not paranoia. It's proof we're still paying attention. Sometimes I visit the old house, now empty, still tangled in probate court. The neighbors think I'm crazy for wanting to see it again. But I go back for closure, not comfort. I stand outside the kitchen window where that scene unfolded, where my hand stayed steady while his shook. I remember every second of it. Not because it defined me, but because it revealed me. I was never fragile. I was just waiting for the right moment to show my strength. And I know now I wasn't alone. So many women out there are still living in that pause, that space between suspicion and proof, between silence and action. So if you're listening to this and any part of it sounds familiar, please hear me. You are not crazy. You are not alone. And you are not weak for wanting to believe the best in someone. But you are strong for choosing to believe in yourself now. Before we end this story, I'd love to know, what resonated most with you? Leave a comment below. And if this story helped you in any way, or you know someone who needs to hear it, please share it. It could be the voice they need. And don't forget to subscribe, because stories like this aren't just entertainment. They're reminders that healing is possible, that truth always rises, and that survival isn't the end. It's the beginning. I'm Emily Grace, survivor, founder, and someone who learned that sometimes justice comes not with a bang, but with a sip of coffee and a steady hand. The cup is still on my wall, but now I drink from something new. And this time, it tastes like peace, like power, like freedom, and finally, like me.